All right, ready? Already said it, yeah. Hello, Derby! Okay, that's pretty lively after you guys were out late last night. I like that. My name is Michael Gough, like cough. I'm the founder of Malware Archaeology. So how many people here know about the cheat sheets, other than the front row? So I am the developer of those cheat sheets, and then also turned into a tool. Come on now. Anybody know Todd Beerley from Rapid 7? I like that picture because it kind of looks like him. So I had to put a plug in there for Todd. He never looks like this, by the way. It's always for you not to know Todd. But yeah, I developed cheat sheets, and then from that, Brian Betcher and I he's from Breaking Down Security podcast, and we developed a tool called LogMD, kind of based on these cheat sheets. And we did before, because of all the PowerShell talks here, release an update to the PowerShell logging cheat sheet so you can get some good tidbits. Some of the obfuscations that Daniel talked about, we have some Splunk queries in there that will catch that kind of behavior, and some base 64 and large block size stuff. So take a look at that. So why are we here? Antivirus is not cutting it. Basically, people say, but it sucks so bad, your bar's too high. So if you just kind of lower your bar like the cartoon, it actually, AV does provide you a lot. It provides us large campaign information hours or days later. So when all these massive email comes in a few hours, for about 4 hours to a couple days later, you'll finally get signature triggers on this. It's good for old stuff, and when people plug in thumb drives, it's really good to detect the use of thumb drives because there's so many thumb drives that have malware on them. And again, AV's lack of catching today's threats are why we're having this talk and why we investigated the EDR space. But also because logging was inadequate in Windows until 3 years ago, when Microsoft released Windows 2012 R2 and Windows 8.1. By default, they added a capability called process command line logging. That was a huge improvement. And then in 2014, in April, they added it to Windows 7 in 2008. Huge improvement to logging. This lack of good logging in the details left an opportunity for the vendors. So this is why the EDR space exists, to create tools that captured the command line or ETL log type data and join them with other details like intel and behavioral type analysis stuff. And again, a lot of the EDR tools, if you've looked at them, especially the EDR IR tools, we'll talk about that in a second, are really just that. They have command line logging, the process that executed and all the parameters as a major thing within it. And that's what they make decisions on in a lot of cases. And it is a major component of what's going on with the endpoint. And this industry is growing. It's estimated to be $1.5 billion by 2020. So there's a lot of opportunity. There's a lot of money in this space. And that's why there's an opportunity, because AV is not cutting it and people don't know how to log. So why are we here? Well, we evaluated a bunch of EDR solutions. We needed a solution that we could put on an endpoint on a bunch of laptops that were outside the company. That was a major requirement for us. That would trigger something was going on with that laptop. We had a lot of cases where people would go out and do their thing in the world, plug into an office, and boom, the IPS would trigger. Or eventually the AV would trigger something. So we needed to get ahead of it, put something on the endpoint that potentially would be good as our IPS would. We had some real surprising findings, thus this talk. Matter of fact, after 2 weeks, I think I turned to Brian and said, this shit sucks. But again, there's a reason why I think it sucks. It may not suck in all cases. We found a lot of bugs. We opened tickets with them. We got some polos. Actually, we're still waiting for some polos. That's our bug bounty, I guess. We just kind of pimp them out of polos. And we only use 3 malware types. The things we get are what we tested with. And only one vendor out of about a dozen that we tested caught all 3 or blocked all 3. Just one vendor. We were surprised at what gave us the most artifacts. It wasn't even close. The artifacts are all the details you would need to remediate the thing on the box, right? That was one of our expectations, is that the details would be in the EDR solution so we could remediate. Because AV doesn't give you that information, neither does IPS. So here's what we found and what you should know. Are you shocked? Only one found it? So our 3 samples were Copter. Copter is fileless. Yeah, it's not fileless. Not fileless at all. Matter of fact, in a talk with the Talos guys, I had clarified that when they talk about fileless, it has to do with the payload, not the dropper, not the Word doc thing, but the stuff that's on the box afterwards. But I would also include the fact that it's actually the infected state of the box. meaning once Kofter powers up, are there any files to detect, or in any fileless malware, are there any files on disk? If I did a file hash compare, LogMD does it, I can say, take this list, or any files, you wouldn't see a difference. But during the infection, it does drop PowerShell scripts, VB scripts, and command files, as well as a file. So it drops, detonates, and deletes. That's very common in fileless malware. So if you do good logging, you'll catch all that, and some of the EDRs will do that as well. But you have to know what to look for. Kofter also stores components in the registry. MSHTA was used to launch JavaScript and calls to PowerShell, a pretty typical thing, right? Living off the land, using a built-in utility to launch other stuffs and scripts, because AV won't detect any scripting. We also use DrideX. DrideX is a well-known campaign, but its cool feature is it uses an MS-signed binary and sideloads a bad DLL from a directory in user space, and morphs on each reboot. So every time DrideX reboots, it'll go, let's say the first time it ran calc and some DLL, malicious DLL, in some directory off of roaming. When it rebooted, it would go reach into System32, pull out MS Paint, rename the DLL that MS Paints need in this directory, pads the DLL so it morphs that as well, so that kills the hash lookups of it, and then infects it. Every time the system reboots, this is how DrideX works. Simple 2 files. And of course, the MS binary is signed, so the DLL is not. And that caused some issues as well. Gozi is pretty typical commodity malware. Run key, files on disk, pretty typical stuff, pretty noisy, uses Tor to communicate out. But the cool thing about this was the locked binary. And when we started seeing this, we kind of scratched our head, like, why would the malwareans care whether the file was locked or not? And so that set us down once we did the testing, we realized, this is why they're locking the files. And again, Kofter, like Powlix, is fileless, and DrideX hits the financial community pretty heavily, and Gozi is now trying to go after built-in compromises of the browser, especially Windows 10 Edge, which, as we saw in one of the prezos, take the mask off, it's really just IE. Kofter gave us the registry artifact. So Kofter stores its payload and its scripts in the registry. So we knew this, and we wanted to see what the EDR would detect in the course of this infection. And of course, it also uses PowerShell, so we wanted to see what the EDRs could do there and communicate out to the internet. DrideX gave us the DLL sideloading, so we could actually see how sideloading of a morphing DLL, which means hash changes on each reboot, would be caught by the EDR, because that's pretty common. You know, just basically morph the malware so the hash changes, and that causes EDR grief. So obviously causes AV grief. And those of us that make rules or do hash lookups grief. And even if you send it to VirusTotal, they give you grief, because VirusTotal will say, I haven't seen anything, which, as Tyler will tell you, and I'll tell you, that's a great indicator you got something. Gozi was pretty typical, but it had a locked binary. This was a challenge to delete post-infection. If the file's locked, I can't copy it, I can't delete it, I can't rename it. And so we wondered why they had done that, and we think it was to affect EDR, and it turned out that was exactly the issue. So EDR failed some very specific things we were looking for. Again, what we're looking for may not be what you're looking for. You may just see this as an IPS type solution, and if it triggers something, you'll just reimage the box, right? And that really was some of the conversations we had with these vendors. We said, so how would I react to this thing you're telling me that's in the console? And after, in some cases, 10 minutes of them not wanting to say it, they would say, yeah, you're going to have to reimage this one because we can't give you enough details. So we would think that in the course of a lot of these triggers, we would have a larger increase of reimages, and that wasn't really what we were after. Though possibly acceptable, because maybe some will block and we could verify that. Some were unsure, we might investigate if it looked interesting like Kofter. But for the most part, we would be putting in a lot of reimage tickets, and roaming laptops, yeah, it doesn't work so well. So that was an issue for us. One of the things that didn't do very well, TELUS auto runs. So the EDR would pop up and say, this is a bad binary. Great. How does it start up? I don't know. So the auto runs were missing in the details of most of the EDR. That was really surprising to me. When I told the vendors this, they were like, well, what do you need that for? Do you understand what an infection and remediation is? And if you leave that piece there and I have to go back to that box later and I find this auto run that has nothing to do with the current infection, then I'm going to go down the wrong path. Yeah, you got to clean up all the stuff in order to move on. I need to know what launched that binary that was called. I need to know what files were placed. I need to get rid of them. I need to know what keys were changed and clean those up. So the related reg keys were also missing. Kofter, none of the solutions we tested gave us the detail or pointed us, with the exception of process command line that Kofter uses, pointed us to any registry keys that were worth anything. There's some exception to that. We'll talk about when we get to that section. Other files than the main binary that were caught. If there were other files sitting right next to it, then it didn't catch it. For example, in DryDex. If one of them caught the DryDex bad DLL, like in the early morphs, if I rebooted it 10 times, it got 10 morphs, it might know the first one, maybe the second one, but it definitely didn't know 3 through 10 because most systems that people had uploaded to VirusTotal had not seen those DLLs yet or those hashes. And so those other files, the MS Paint and the System32 or the roaming, whatever name directory, it didn't even ever see that or give me an indication that that was part of it. Now it's benign, it's a valid Microsoft binary, but it really doesn't belong in roaming / some funky directory name. And then other related logdales, scheduled task. Some of them, GOSI, for example, and others, DryDex can use a scheduled task. They sometimes have 2 persistent mechanisms, and they really did not do a good job at pointing me at that. So now here's a scheduled task firing off that the EDR did not tell us about that would stay on the box, and the next time you investigate, you might find this funky task, and now you've got 2 unrelated events. Services also were a thing that, unless the EDR was really designed at providing you a lot of noise, it's something that it didn't point you to. It didn't stick out. And they were all kind of terrible at third-party integration. Now, you have to pay for VirusTotal. It's a lot of money. But only one solution used it, integrated it fully, where it was within the console itself. Most of them said, here, click on this, and it just basically did the hash lookup and took you to the page at VirusTotal, so they didn't have to pay for it. But this is a piece of information that, in the course of known knowns, which is what VirusTotal hashes are, does provide you some information that will help Tier 1 analysts, or even Tier 2s and definitely Tier 3s, whether something is potentially good or bad to either reimage or throw it over the fence to us higher-end analysts to look at. So I found some of this third-party integration or lack of kind of surprising. Some of them have lots, like Carbon Black has lots of third-party integration and threat intel. But a lot of them I really expected to do more than VirusTotal other than just a link to a web page. And basically all of them lacked the ability and the details, the artifacts you need to remediate. If you think these solutions are going to give you everything you need to remediate, yeah, you're going to have to really seriously consider that. Our baseline. We have an IPS, surprisingly good. Quite frankly, I'm shocked at how our managed service IPS is working for us. I think in the course of the 3 years we've had it, and I would say 3/5 of the tickets we opened where they missed some malware we had infected box with were around Christmas time, so I'm thinking people are on vacation. I'm shocked that stuff we get at 8:39 in the morning and we're uploading, VirusTotal sees nothing about, but yet the IPS is triggering something about the malware. GOSI uses Tor, so it always triggers on the Tor traffic. But I'm kind of impressed with that. That was something I did not expect to be that good. It didn't used to be years ago, so with the integration of their IR services, they actually make a pretty good product now. So our baseline was our IPS triggered on all 3 of these solutions. So no details with IPS, right? No details with AV. So once somebody said, hey, Tyler's box is bad, you need to go look at it, we would have to go into IR mode and go investigate that box. It just points to Tyler's box and says, I'm bad. That's all you get. Maybe a name of what it is. Sometimes it's just phone home or some piece of information that doesn't tell you anything about it. There are no details. But at least it alerted us to something. But we wanted something that alerted us not only when you're on the corporate network where IPS works, but off for all those laptops and roaming users, home users, over the VPN, that sort of thing. So let's talk some boring terms real quick. Gartner and other define these terms. ETDR, Endpoint Threat Detection and Response, right? That's a term that was used about 2 years ago. It's dead, so if you hear that term, just ignore it. What they did is just take the word threat out. Now it's just EDR, Endpoint Detection and Response. That is the current term we will use. And in about 2 years, everybody's moving to EPP, or Endpoint Protection Platform. What does that mean? Well, it's AV plus randomly related shit. Okay? That is a quote from somebody. And I kind of agree with that, right? So if you think of AV with all the AV EPP platforms, then there is the encryption and all the things that AV does. Next gen AV, you've heard this term a lot too. Gartner definitely doesn't like this term, but it probably evolved from PCI because a lot of these next gen vendors were getting PCI certifications for AV, like Cylance, for example, and they said, we're next gen AV to try to make it sound fluffy, marketing, whatever. I'm not really sure. But it's a dead term. Okay, so Gartner doesn't want to use it anymore. They want to kill it, and I agree. AV is AV, right? It's signature based. There's a specific way it works. These signatures are all saved within one master repository. There's not a lot of behavioral analytics. It's some well-known signatures, but that means it can be bypassed, right? But it does catch a lot of stuff. So let's look at some definitions real quick. Remember, here's the EPP. That's pretty much all the main vendors we're aware of. It's that AV plus randomly related shit. This is Gartner's definition. You can read this online when I post it. Just put it on there so you know what Gartner's saying about it. And again, it's just AV and randomly related shit. So here's the magic quadrant. So as we can see here, the big EPP, the AV vendors right now are the typical AV suites, right? The platforms or the AV randomly related shit stuff. Down here is the EDR, right? This is the up and coming EDR solutions. Stuff to the left, yeah, well, you know, they're trying to get over to the right. But these are pretty much what we have going right now. So how I felt after weeks of testing. EDR vendors hit 11 out of 10 targets with 9 bullets. Right, that's the marketing fluff. They think there are just the end all. You need to replace and throw out your McAfee and Symantec and yada yada yada. Yeah, you might want to not do that so fast. There are lots of tools out there, lots of them. We did not test all of them. I'm going to talk about what we tested and did not test. And all EDR EPP solutions are not created equal. So this is an important point that you need to take a look at when you're looking at these solutions. What we're talking about in regards to the categorization, which we're about to run through, it is the primary function of that tool. You can put a Cylance, which is absolutely nothing like CrowdStrike or Carbon Black, and say, we're going to evaluate both of those. They're nothing alike. What's the primary feature these things do? Oh, we have this feature too, this feature too. It's not your primary feature. It's probably not even your secondary feature. It's a feature. It's probably not very good, and I can't rely on it. So I'm talking about primary features, okay? And after a long discussion with my friend, Dr. Anton Chavakin, changing the terms, he didn't like me doing that. So I'm just going to add on to them to make it easier. We're going to use their terms, the industry terms, not going to invent any new ones here, but it make it easier. So as you evaluate or try to put these things into buckets, it'll make it easier for you. Call them EDR or EPP, but basically we're going to add the EDRP for preventative type solutions. These are the next-gen AV solutions basically, right? The primary purpose of them is to prevent. They're probably not going to give you a lot of details and all that, but they're preventative. EDRD for detective and information, right? They're going to detect something happen, not necessarily provide you any kind of prevention or very little, maybe known signature stuff, and they'll provide you some information. EDR-IR, the incident response stuff, okay? And then EPP, the AV plus randomly related shit. And then EPP ecosystems, okay? This mixes network and endpoint stuff. EDR preventative focuses on prevention. We would call this next-gen AV, or a lot of people refer to this as next-gen AV. May provide detective alerts, may do some IR details, but really it's a set and forget solution. It is a preventative solution, much like AV. It's going to trigger something, it's going to block something, and that's generally what it does, and it does, you know, fairly well. Here's some examples of the vendors. I'm not going to specifically pick on any of them. We can talk about that after the talk if you want to know some more details. Detective solutions. Well, they focus on detection, little or no prevention yet. Okay, they're generally moving that way. They may provide you some additional information. The console has all kinds of data in there. Again, a lot of it is normal noise. This is what drove me crazy about a lot of these solutions, is they did almost nothing to reduce the noise in the console. But Tyler and I can tell you, the first thing we do in IR and malware analysis is get rid of the normal noise, so you can try to make those things that are abnormal show up. And if I have a console with 1,000 or 2,000 or 10,000 endpoints and I have all that normal noise unfiltered, it's unusable, in my opinion. That is something we found that we did not like about these solutions. But they are evolving to EDRP. They are, all of them, the ones I talked to, are working on moving towards a preventative solution or potentially acquire somebody. I do not see a reason for an EDRD solution. You either want to prevent or you want IR details. Here's some example of these. IBM BigFix Detect is the old Trusteer stuff integrated with BigFix. So you got the BigFix query engine with the Trusteer detection engine. The detection stuff, yeah, not so much. BigFix, I love BigFix, but they really haven't quite gotten there yet. And no prevention. CyberReason is moving towards prevention, and Carbon Black Response acquired Confer to fill that gap. EDR-IR focuses on response, hunting capabilities, detective capabilities, little or no prevention. Carbon Black Response has no prevention. You got to buy Confer or the EDR Defend for that. or the carbon black defend for that. And they do provide you a lot of details, but again, lots of noise and a dashboard you're going to be using or stuck in. What I would say here, if you want to use one of these solutions, or you think you want to use one of these solutions, the API is going to be your best friend. You're going to take all the data and you're going to send it to log management. So if you're a Splunk house, your rep's going to love you because your license is about to shoot through the roof. But that way I have all the data and I can query it as I want and not the limitations of what the dashboards allow you or not allow you to do. One of the vendors, when I said, I need you to help me find this malware because I know everything about this damn malware and I can't find crap in your console, walk me through it. And I'm not kidding you. The IR engineer got on the phone, immediately jumped to the query window, bypassed the dashboard altogether, and started querying stuff. You have to understand how these solutions were developed. They were developed by an IR firm that basically took an analyst researching a box, taking the artifacts out, and then this console will allow you to go hunt. But you had to know something first. Usually the good analysts would do that work. Tyler would do that work, or I would do that work. We'd go to the console and say, look for these 12 things. They're good at that. But they're not good taking all this data and shrinking it down. Thus, the API would be your best friend because you can filter out all kinds of stuff within your log management. And again, we use LogMD to get those details, and then we would be able to go hunting. But if you were trying to focus at these solutions and say, all the data's in here, I should be able to find this infection, good luck with that. Let me know how it works for you. So here's some example of those. I will give a plug that one by far I like the most. It's a managed service only, it's SecureWorks stuff. Carbon Black Response, you really need the API. I do not like the console. But it's got a lot of threat intel and third-party integration, so you know it's a solid suite. There's CrowdStrike and Mandiant as well. Mandiant's part of one of the big ones. The ecosystems, these are the big guys. So we got the platforms, the endpoint, web gateway, network, email, right? They have everything. And if you're in that space, if you're an all Cisco house, you might go the whole ecosystem of Cisco, or FireEye Mandiant, you may go the whole ecosystem of FireEye Mandiant. And so that's really what these are. We're not going to do a forklift upgrade, so we did not test these. But that's if you're pretty much in these boats already and you do go down this path and you have everything of theirs. You might at some point say, this is really not cutting it, so I'm going to then not use this module and renew that module and then go get one of these EDR solutions possibly. But generally I find the people that buy these will not look at all the others, and we did not test them as well. Danger, expectations ahead. So what do we expect? Well, definitely some decent results. We expected many or most of these solutions to catch what our IPS caught, as that's what we measure against, our baseline. IPS triggered something and said, Tyler's box is bad. I want all of these to equally do that at minimum, right? I want it to say, hey, that system's got a virus or malware on it. EDR should do the same and give us all kinds of details, right? That was kind of what we expected. After weeks of testing, here's what we were greeted with. Yeah, this was my expectations were clearly a little high for this. So what did we test? We did not test the ecosystems. We're not going to forklift upgrade. We don't have that scenario, and with our 5,000 endpoints that we were going to basically put in all RSA or all Mandiant or Cisco or whatever. We did not test EPP. We wanted an InfoSec control tool. Even though they're morphing or may buy some of these other vendors, it was not something we wanted to look at. We wanted a very tactical solution. We did not look at sandbox solutions because sandbox gives you a lot of data. But sandboxes can be bypassed, and it's often reported that up to 30% of malware is now sandbox aware, so it's dangerous to rely on that technology, so we opted not to because we use LogMD, so we can get all the details in bare bones hardware. So that wasn't really an option for us as well. We wanted a preventative solution on the laptops, and sandboxing just seemed to be a delaying with all the stuff and all the places that these people were around the world, and work offline when they're not on the internet. And we did not really test any managed service providers as well, though a lot of them do offer managed services as a part of their solution. They have a group that does that. We did test the preventative solutions, the EDRPs, or the next-gen AVs. We did test the EDRDs, and we did test the EDR IR tools, the typical up-and-coming group that we saw in the Gartner Quadrant. And we didn't pay any attention to the Gartner Quadrant in regards to why we tested stuff, though I did reach out to Anton and ask him what he liked. Turned out to pretty much align with what we thought. So first thing we did is analyze the infection using LogMD, so we could get the artifacts. We knew everything we needed to remediate the box. Now we had a baseline. This is the thing that I think a takeaway, number one, is if you're going to test this stuff, you got to know what the heck it is this stuff does that you're going to test it with. What artifacts are there? What did it do? What run keys? What file registry entries? What did Kofker do? How is it fileless or not fileless? How did GOSI and the DLL sideloading behavior look? Oh, the hash is always morphing. Okay, that's cool. And so you need to understand your samples so that when you look in EDR for them, you'll know what it does and does not do. Okay, so we had this going into it, but we really didn't think that that was what we thought that solutions would give us some details. And we tested 3 conditions. User initiated, we call this pre-infection. So that means I'm gonna take a Word doc, WScript, etc., and it will catch the user clicking on something. Already infected. We've got 5,000 or 3,500 nodes of Windows boxes out there. We're going to push this solution out there. We'd have the same problem if you're in Tripwire or Bit9. If the box is already infected and you baseline that box, you just baseline the infection. So we wanted that condition because you don't know what the state of these boxes are. And then we tested the pen tester bad actor scenario where connect to a box and push Kofter from one box to another and wait for it to reboot. Well, we rebooted it, but typical as the Chinese acted in the WinNTI attack that I had to deal with. They literally just crawled around the network, laterally moved, placed the files, moved on, and waited for the system's reboot. So we wanted to look at these because this is reality. This is a typical condition. All right, expectations versus reality. So how'd they do? Most did okay with when user initiated clicking on something. Most did okay with that because they're getting that behavior of step 1, step 2, step 3. Most, not all. Meaning when a user opened the Word doc and WScript kicked off, right, macro or OLA object and double-clicked it, and then launched PowerShell out to the internet, generally that was caught, okay, because that behavior is pretty deterministic today, okay? Systems that are already infected, yeah, many if not most miss this scenario, and bad actor or pushing files waiting for reboots, many miss this as well. So really, EDR is much like AD. It catches the top portion, but it didn't do too well for the existing solution. This is where EDR IR hunting might come into benefit. Kofter was missed by several solutions. When it was caught, it was the MSHTA run line calling out to JavaScript, which then called PowerShell, which read the registry, dropped everything to disk, executed it, deleted it. It was that MSHTA PowerShell call that triggered the ones that did catch it. Okay, and no other artifacts, okay, with the exception of some of the EDR IR tools, but you would really have to dig and it was not obvious. Dridex was missed because of their side loading scenario. As it morphed, the DLL hashes were not known. So if the solutions were more like a next-gen AV or detective hash repo, which a lot of them have large hash repos, they did not know about the morphs because every time Dridex reboots, the DLL would morph. Gozi was missed by a couple because of that locked file scenario. It couldn't take action against the file because it was locked. Some of the solutions are not kernel hooked. They are user running solutions. So warning there. And so that's why we think that Gozi was locking the files is in those cases where it's user running EDR, it doesn't have rights to the file to delete it. And really, IPS did better than EDR. The IPS caught all 3. Only one of the EDR solutions, about a dozen, caught all 3. So our results were surprising. So how do you evaluate these things? Reality check. Check your expectations. These are not silver bullets. I'm here to tell you that if you think this is the next-gen replacement for AV, stop. Don't waste your money. Seriously consider how it will work and how you will use it in your organization. It will or can help, but it is not a silver bullet. Build a set of requirements. What do you need? What do you really need? And expect you will be disappointed or not satisfied with solutions. We had a simple scale, 0 to 3. You did nothing to, yeah, okay, you did okay. 3, right? So it was a real simple score. And we added them all up, and only 2 solutions were close to one another, and the rest weren't even close. But again, preventative was a big part of what we wanted, and tier 1. Test your shit, okay? You really need to test this stuff. Whether, and again, I think shock, surprise, bewilderment, whatever, do people actually test this stuff? I mean, I think I said that a dozen times. Are people actually testing this? In some cases, I think when we called these things in and opened the bugs with these tools or whatever you call them, but I call them bugs, got some polos, that either they were surprised, like, thanks for this really thorough evaluation, or like, yeah, we know about that. So I was kind of really surprised. I think people don't test this stuff, was my conclusion, because I think if you did just simple testing of like just the 3 samples we used, you'd find maybe your solution wasn't up to par and you might want to go a different route. And again, see what works. My requirements are not going to be any of your requirements. My best practices are not your best practices. I needed a preventive solution. If you want just an IR solution and you're going to API the hell out of it and throw it in log management, yeah, they're completely different solutions here. Remember, EDRP is on one end, EDR IR is on the other. They are not the same thing. And again, they will change. I'm sure since we did our testing, one of the bugs we found, they said they would fix, and actually they did, right? They put the hash in the repo, so I morphed it 10 times, tried it again, and showed them, you're still not catching it? And they're like, huh. I'm like, I bet you catch the first one, so I loaded the first one, sure enough, bink, we caught it. Hash lookups. So you immediately know who's building a hash repo, which in morphing malware doesn't work. It's like AV signatures. You're chasing a runaway train. And they will improve over time. This is a very immature arena right now. They are adding features upon features, one right after the other. So they are gonna, and we saw the future roadshows. We did not make decisions based on that, but we heard what they had to say, and there's a lot of stuff coming, a lot of stuff. So I would say in 2 years, they might be a little more mature to where this test all over again will give us completely different results. Or we hope. Suggested evaluation, figure out what you need. Right? EDRP? EDR? Yeah, no, pick one. Skip the middle guy. It's either preventative or IR, or you're going to pick an EPP or eco solution. Compare apples to apples. Don't try to compare Cylance to CrowdStrike or Carbon Black Response. They are nothing alike. Nothing. Use the malware you actually receive. So all those samples we used, we got through mail campaigns and or infections that someone had picked up in the wild, out and about with our laptops. And we harvested off the box. Yeah, if Kofter's fileless, how did I harvest it? Right, so it's not fileless. And we basically used what we got, things we actually responded to, real world examples. We didn't use the vendor solution. Never use vendor malware. They know they can catch it. Use what you get and how your process reacted to what you got, and see how the tool works within the process of how you react. That's what surprised us. We wanted Tier 1 to help out here. We wanted to spread some of this work out like we do with the IPS. The IPS triggers, these guys will enter a ticket and all this stuff for us for some, depending on what it is, and do some blocks. We wanted to spread some of the load out so Brian and I can do more fun stuff and more projects and whatnot. So you want to, in our case, we wanted Tier 1 to be involved, and Tier 2 and of course Tier 3. We did not want to open a bunch of reimage tickets. They can, but that's what we wanted. We want something to distribute. So don't use their samples. Get something from someone you know, or us, somebody who's done testing. I'm sure Tyler will share all kinds of malware with you. Well, I don't know if you make it a habit of giving it away, but seriously, something that, and test it. LogMD it first so you get the details. So you have, okay, here's the details of it. Let's see what the solution does. And then, of course, create a short list of things you need. LogMD will be the thing I recommend to evaluate it. I'm really shocked at how much this contributed to our evaluation. I didn't really expect this as part of it. It was just something we did, and it's like, oh, this stuff should catch this. And it turned out there was a significant gap. How easy is it to use in a console? I was dumbfounded with some of these consoles. I was just like, what the? Yeah. Matter of fact, one of the vendors told us they had an RV solution coming up, which is basically a user. They had nicknames for the solutions, and they had this thing, and it's solely to address usability, because the usability was kind of hard. Only one really passed my usability requirements, where I can say, I can put this in front of Tier 1 and say, okay, when you see these 5, 10 conditions, yeah, you're good. Open the ticket, close it, that it's been handled, move on. And really, that was one of the expectations. If you don't have that, then the use of console is not so important to you. If you're going to API all the data, the console is definitely not that important to you. And for example, RAV, all of our data goes into Splunk, and we basically trigger off of that. The only thing we go in the console for is to trigger a scan. And for the most part, we ignore the console because the consoles kind of suck. And again, what do you expect them to provide as far as detail? These are our expectations, may not be yours. But we expected them to seriously give us information to remediate. Not just, okay, Tyler's box bad, I'm going to reimage it. Okay, I've got 100 reimages this week. Yeah, your help desk IT guys aren't going to like that. Not at all. Again, you will know the system is affected in some details. I was real surprised at the fact that run keys were something that didn't I found this binary. Well, check for the 1100, 1400 run keys and tell me where the hell it's launching from so I can whack the run key and whack the files, right? No, I couldn't even get that out of them. And some of them said, well, why do you need that? It doesn't matter if the binary's gone. Oh, seriously? Have you ever done IR? You got to get rid of the old artifacts first. And again, that means if it just triggers and tells you Tyler's box is bad, Brian and I now have a full-time job investigating boxes, because I'm pretty sure this thing's going to trigger on a lot of stuff that is probably not 100% infections, which means Putting EDR in would have gave us a full-time job. We already have full-time jobs, so now we have staffing impact. Test the damn stuff. Okay, this is how you evaluate. You must test it. Come up with a short test. It did not take us very long to run through these 3 samples. We have a little disk duplicator. We had 6 boxes or so lined up, and we just basically pulled the master out, replicated it, reinfected the box, the next sample, and just ripped through them. So about an hour, we pretty much were able to test the reaction to it and then sit in the console and look to see what we saw. And then how does this, or how will this affect your staffing? That's real important. We wanted to push some of this work out, sort of like AV does, right? The AV triggers go, these guys open tickets, they kick off a scan, they reach out to the user, doesn't waste Brian and I's time with some tier 1 work. That's kind of what we wanted this to do as well. And again, shouldn't this stuff save us time or at least automate some tasks and give us some efficiency? Isn't really that should be the goal of an EDR solution? So you're going to seriously need to look at that. Because bottom line is, I think in most cases, this stuff would have given Brian and I double work. And that's just wrong. Okay, unless our full-time job was hunting, but we're doing rollouts and projects, etc. So yeah, we needed some efficiencies here. It's all in the details. What surprised us? My expectations were that I would get some details more than AV and IPS got us, right? AV tells me this file's bad with the signature, and IPS says Tyler's box has got something bad on it. I expected that we'd get some details to help us know the system was infected and how. I was so disappointed. I did not get what I was after. Again, my requirements are not your requirements. My best practices are not your best practices. But Tyler and I will gladly train you. Okay, here's where I should bash the solutions as how bad they were. But again, I'm sure by the end of this talk, some solution just made an improvement to something I would bitch about. So I don't think it's fair. They are evolving. By the time you get around to testing them, they might have addressed one of the side loading issues, for example. Or they may look at a funky process command line and see a reg key in it and go show that key as real obvious. The red cloak stuff made that kind of little grouping by machine. It probably had the best of that, right? But it's a managed service only and it's real expensive. But that's what I was after. That's what I wanted as an IR. So these IR guys who developed it, which is, they actually took that into account because that's how they operate. And that's what I was looking for. But again, I realize my expectations are based on how good logging can be and how we do it. Windows logging cheat sheets on the machines we do that on are really good. And a lot of these solutions are just fancy log correlators. So again, I build a log Splunk environment or Elk environment. I send all my stuff to there. These solutions kind of replace that need for you because they're just fancy log solutions and it's in their cloud, so you don't have to build it. So there's some advantage there. Problem is the consoles are so hard to use that you're pretty much going to want to throw all that data into a log management solution, make your own rules, and do your own hunting. Like the example I gave when the IR guy just jumped immediately to the console.
Hi folks, I'm Geek here. Unfortunately, we had a little bit of a video problem, so we lost audio also until about the 43-minute mark. Sorry for the inconvenience.
do that, we'd have a much better solution that would break into my top 10. So after this evaluation, I think I have a good way of testing EDR solutions. I'm not interested in bypassing them. That was not a goal, but we did, which told us, hey, maybe we just want to spend every effort we can in our AV and EPP and turn on all the host stuff and all the bells and whistles and all the things, and maybe just use that. So it gave us a lot of stuff. Maybe just use logging and BigFix and call it a day. But none of them broke into my top 10, which really surprised me. I really expected one of them to be able to have a meeting like this and say, yep, I highly recommend this solution. This thing was awesome. If one of those solutions, or more preferably, do these two things, then I think all of you would be highly satisfied. That's my requirements and my take on what we think EDR should do. So the resources, you can get LogMD at the LogMD website. There's a free tool, so you can download for free. There's a premium one as well. The Windows logging cheat sheets, if you don't know about them, please do. They're mentioned in a lot of talks. I think they were in 3 or 4. Tyler uses them. He handed out some stuff. Many of the talks, Ben 10 mentioned it as well. And the Prezo will be on Malware Archaeology, and we have a couple minutes for questions, and I've got thumb drives to whack people with. Yes? Maybe I should ask the question first.
Have you looked into these from the perspective of operational performance? Did they have any impact on the box? Was battery life or what?
All right. Question was, what kind of performance impacts? None that were noticeable. One of the solutions was kind of hiccupy. One of the problems, another talk that was mentioned where we pointed out Windows 10 was our labs because we wanted to use the next gen of the stuff we're rolling out. And unfortunately with Windows 10, because we were using a MSDN license, that it's auto-updating now and you get the stupid upgrade, not a patch. Yeah, it went through and whacked all of our machines in the course of this because it's like you have no choice now, even though we have 7-day deferral. And we came across that, and I got a feeling that might have been the reason one of them hiccuped. Matter of fact, in one case, I stopped the service, restarted the service, and it then caught the infection. So there was some weird stuff, but performance, didn't notice anything. CPU, none of that. We were all desktops on this scenario. They all have stats on that, and they're all, one of the solutions did so well, they're even VMware certified. One solution was VMware certified, where the VM guys, when they certified them, actually told them no the first time. They're like, why? We know this stuff has no impact. Well, that's the problem, is there was so little impact, we thought we did the test wrong, and so we have to do it over. And that would be in silo, by the way, if you have a VMware scenario where you want that VMware hook. But none that were noticeable at all. Yes?
Sometimes you see malware attempt to execute in its neuter, right? So it begins a dropper, and maybe it starts an infection, but because of one or more content controls you have, it's neuter. I've also advocated putting out some of 30% of malware won't go in VM. We'll find it where the markers are, distribute those to all of your machines, and 30% of the malware may not execute.
Yep.
Is there an easy way to tell if it's neutered or not? Like if something begins to execute, but it's not fully an IR issue?
Yeah, so does it give you some indications of the execution and failing? If the process command line, so what you're doing is you're watching the Word doc open or whatever, and boom, 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 boom down the line. If they have really good logging type, which is a lot of what the CrowdStrikes and Carbon Black Response and whatnot, and give you the details, you can kind of see where it fails. There's lack of communication outbound, things that you would expect to occur. Or it didn't detect it was on a domain, which we see all the time, or wasn't enough files in the box. Usually the behavior details. These are the details I'm talking about that make the decision as us as IR people. That was hard to find in these solutions. It was not obvious because all the normal noise was mixed in with it, and so it made it really hard to find that. So that was one of the drawbacks of it. Yes?
All these solutions, just basically shipping logs off and doing the analyzing and triggering upstream, or is it all happening like on the endpoint itself?
It happens on the endpoint. So are these collecting and then sending upstream? The answer is yes. They collect locally. They send the data upstream where all the thread intel and hash repos and all that reside, and then you see it in the console. It takes anywhere from 2 to 15 minutes. Some took 20 minutes to see the data. So we had to wait for the infection data to finally come up and get the little bloop, something's wrong, or the machine's got an issue. But most of these are all now cloud. They're moving all to cloud. Some you will have to build your own, like BigFix Detect. You have to build your own environment for. But most of them are all cloud-based, and it does take 15, 20 minutes to get that data.
The user itself also?
No, it can. That's configurable in some cases. Some have no indication to the user. Some have a little pop-up, and it's totally controllable in most cases of the console. So it can be like AV or not. But for the most part, it's doing ETL logging. That's what they're collecting in this stuff. It's real obvious when you look at it. Like, this is the same stuff we have in Splunk. What the hell? Because they're just doing trace logs. Because it is the data that we're all seeking. Yes.
What's your take on continuing to run traditional AV with these products, or even multiple AV?
That's a great question. So, yeah, our goal would be to run them both until you're certain in the course of monitoring both infections that it exceeds or you don't have a gap. Like, for example, thumb drives. Start plugging in thumb drives. AV is good for that, really good for that. It shows us a problem we have. And so if it can replace all that and you're comfortable with it, then I would recommend the transition. I wouldn't just snap it and switch it. I don't think they're there yet.
Yeah, it's interesting. PCI allows us to do that, but it's not a good idea.
Yeah, you're taking a risk. I mean, I think because 1 to 3 got selected, you might not be improving your condition. Might not. Again, my requirements are different than your requirements. Yes?
So during your testing, did you guys just use the defaults on the EDR itself, or did you guys build any custom IOCs or custom signatures? And if you did that second piece, how did that impact the results?
Did we do any custom signatures or do anything outside the defaults? We definitely went outside the defaults. We set up a group. We pretty much turned everything to the highest value we could. A couple vendors said, yeah, don't turn that on. What the frick's it doing in here then? Don't release it until it's ready to go. We definitely worked with them to say, I want this thing. And so we created custom groups and just turned the stuff way up because, right, that's kind of what IPSs have, lots of signatures. You turn them on, detect it all. AV gets a signature base. So we did not pussyfoot around. We did not take cleanup action. We tried to manually do remediate. Yeah, remediate Explorer, and there's 2 of them. Yeah, and good luck with that, because then the other one launches the other one, and yeah, you can't remediate. Again, one of the flaws of the solutions we found is like your remediation just blows. So no, we did not create anything custom. We wanted to use the console, trying to think like a dummy to say, how can we're going to have to configure this stuff, but then how will they react to it? So we wanted it as noisy as possible. We wanted it to break in regards to configuration. So good question. All right, I'm out of time. They're like, and so I'm around. We'll talk about it this afterwards. Thanks.